Hi, I'm Mike Field.
I'm Pat Whalen.
Pat is a lifelong comic book geek.
And Mike is a filmmaker and storyteller.
So naturally, a bulk of our conversations surround the world of the Marvel movies. Some consider the MCU one of the greatest achievements in modern-day filmmaking, and others just think they're comic book movies. Each episode will tackle one film and discuss the differences between the comic book and what's on screen. We'll explore the growth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe from its inception to present day and beyond, and have a little fun along the way. You may not have asked for it, you certainly don't need it, but you'll be happy we're here. We think. This is yet another MCU podcast. All right, our second bonus episode before we kick off phase 2. Pat, how you doing?
I'm good, Mike. How you doing?
I am doing well. It's been a long time.
It has. We have not seen each other since about 5 minutes ago.
All right, so today, this episode, we are going to be talking about the history of Marvel Studios. It's going to be, again, a brief overview because we obviously can't get into it in its entirety, and we want to keep this episode under 30 minutes because it's definitely a bite-sized portion of Yamp, I guess, is what I want to say there. Yeah. So
but it's important to what we talk about with the movies and the shows and everything else that happens.
Absolutely. And a lot of this stuff you might have heard already, like with the history of Marvel Comics, you might actually hear some stuff here that we talked about already on that bonus episode. Yeah. But it's just kind of like a more concentrated effort to just give you a little bit more background in terms of where we're coming from, what we reference. So Pat, I guess why don't you start us off?
Well, we're not going to start at the beginning.
Oh, again?
Like we talked. No, we're not going to start at the beginning.
Okay, good.
Because if we started at the beginning, we'd have to go all the way back to the Marvel Comics history, which we did in our last episode. So check that out.
Exactly. Nice.
We're going to actually pick up in the mid-1990s.
Mid-90s. Okay. So I'm going to go back, though, at some point and just kind of reference when you're done with this.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Anyway, so we're going to go back to the mid-90s when Marvel was filing for bankruptcy. After a comic book boom went bust, they were running out of cash, and a company named Toy Biz, may have heard of them, creator of toys and action figures, decided to acquire Marvel. Because the best way to market your toys is through movies and cartoons. And who had the movies and the cartoons IP? Marvel. So as a result of that, once the acquisition happened, they launched Marvel Films and later Marvel Productions with New World Animation. If you remember from our last episode, New World Group had taken over the Marvel Entertainment Group. They became the parent company that brought Marvel public. Mm-hmm. Through various distributors, they released early 90s animated series. X-Men, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk. Things that you'll see all on Disney Plus now.
Oh, very nice.
But you may remember on UPN or Fox.
UPN.
Man,
nice.
We are dating ourselves with this one.
Remember UPN? You remember when Buffy moved to the UPN for the last 2 seasons? Yeah. They weren't that good. But I
remember when
still watched them.
Smallville was on WB, and then the next year was the CW.
Yeah, I remember. UPN. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway. So while this was all happening, in order to stave off the bankruptcy, which, spoilers, didn't actually happen.
It didn't? They survived?
They filed for bankruptcy, but as we know in the corporate world, filing for bankruptcy is just pressing restart.
Nice. Must be nice.
It is. So they sold a bunch of the movie and licensing rights to Sony, Fox, Universal to, they would collect fees off of that. They, and able to help them kind of buoy themselves up a little bit. Didn't really work, but once they came out of bankruptcy with Toy Biz and everything, they helped launch Marvel Studios as part of it. It was a second arm of the new Marvel Comics, Marvel Entertainment Group.
So now I have in 96, Fox bought New World Communication.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they incorporated Marvel Studios and Marvel Films. And then they appointed Stanley chairman of Marvel Studios in 97.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So they appointed Stanley chairman emeritus at the time. And part of that was because, and we touched on it in the last episode, that the IP for comics is incredibly valuable. But what they never did was pay the creators appropriately. So if we go back to our last episode when we talk about the launch of Superman, the first superhero, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, they created the character. I think they sold him for like $300, the equivalent of $300 to DC. And they worked on the property for a little while longer, but once DC kind of booted him off, they booted him off. Mm-hmm. They didn't have any control anymore on Superman. And for years and years, they pushed for the right to have their name. It says Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And that happened with a ton of characters. Batman with Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Obviously the Marvel Comics too. The difference with Marvel Comics is they were all created by Stan Lee. He had his hand in just about all the characters that we know and love, except for Captain America. That was Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, but Stan Lee brought him into the Avengers, and with Jack Kirby and a handful of the other artists at the time. When Superman the movie came out in the 70s, the Richard Donner version, it was going to make a boatload of money.
Yeah.
And they were paying, Warner Brothers controlled the character, and they were making the movie for also a boatload of money. Mm-hmm. The original creators weren't getting any of it. So there was a fight over them receiving licensing rights. And so Stan Lee tried to make a similar deal on his characters. And so he at some point had negotiated a 10% licensing right on the characters that he helped create.
This is in the 70s.
This is in the 70s,
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so they agreed on that. And then when they started making the movies and everything in the 90s and the 2000s, it didn't really happen. And so there was a fight between Stan Lee and Marvel. They paid him a big settlement, 7 figures or more, and made him this chairman emeritus of the company. And he was always a figurehead of Marvel. So that is kind of where the business side of selling your comics to movie studios works and where the value of them sits. A couple other names to note is you want to remember Avi Arad. So Avi Arad was a businessman. He was Toy Biz co-founder, and he produced basically all of the Marvel movies and the early cartoons and everything. His name was attached to a lot of these things. So he understood the business of telling these stories and bringing them to the screen.
He became the CEO and president of Marvel Films.
Yes, he did.
Right.
Yeah. So he, he was heavily involved with Marvel Films and the Marvel movies up until about The Incredible Hulk in 2008, when he stepped away and Kevin Feige came in.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm getting the timeline right. So the modern Marvel Studios, the one that we know, the one that's launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is the one that I think most people are interested in learning about. The other piece of it is, they made some money off of the X-Men movie in the 2000s, which is now 20 years old.
Yeah, I know.
You're old. Yeah, I'm old.
Yeah.
You're old.
Oh, well, yeah, but
I'm wise. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, the Fantastic Four movies, those were all licensed out to their
first two.
The first two.
Not the remake, not the Just Trank one.
No, the Just Trank one was licensed out to Fox.
Yeah, but I'm trying to forget that one.
Oh, yeah, we should all forget that one. I think we touched on this in the Iron Man episode. But in the early 2000s, Marvel began to realize that they could make a lot of money off of making these projects in-house.
Right. Well, the first Marvel Studios movie, correct me if I'm wrong, is Blade. Studios.
It was a Marvel Studios, but it was a Marvel. That one was sold off to New Line.
Okay, so that wasn't the first one they
Marvel Studios is like they were a production piece of it.
But the Marvel Studios logo is in front of Blade, isn't it?
It's in front of
like that little.
It's in front of Spider-Man too.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
And X-Men.
Right.
So they're like a production arm.
Right.
They're not the own. They didn't own.
They're not what they are now.
They're not what they are now.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. So yes, to go back, Marvel Studios had always been involved in either the cartoons, the animated series, and the movies of the late 90s, early 2000s. It was their characters that those other companies were playing with, whether they were distributors or they were the actual.
But they weren't controlling content.
They weren't really controlling content. No, right, I mean, they might have been used in a advisory role. Tell us a little bit more about this character. Tell us a little bit about, who this guy is, what they do and everything.
What's this guy's Spider-Man do? What's his deal?
Give me pictures of Spider-Man.
I don't know why we're sounding like we're from Newsies, but
we're launching a publishing company. Give me pictures of Spider-Man. All right, so now we're going to talk about the Marvel Studios that we know, the one that has launched the cinematic universe. And that is in the early 2000s, as I've said, Marvel saw the value in keeping their IP in-house. So they brought on a gentleman by the name of David Maisel. He came on as the chief operating officer of Marvel Studios. His background included stints at Boston Consulting Group, Creative Artists Agency, so CAA, Livent, and Endeavor Talent Agency. So he knew talent, he knew movies, he knew, the business of putting things together. So there's a really good article, and this is our recommended reading for this week. Ooh. There's a great piece in the Hollywood Reporter on him. He had a couple years ago.
An older, okay.
Yeah, it was from a couple years ago, but he was kind of the guy that didn't get enough credit in putting this together. Mm-hmm. You knew about Arad, you knew about Kevin Feige, you knew about the Disney deal, but you didn't know that where David Maisel sat in all this. So he pitched to Marvel the idea of producing their own films with their own characters. And one thing to note here is, had he shown up a couple months later than he did, Marvel may have sold Captain America to Warner Brothers and Thor to Sony.
Oof.
Yeah. So Iron Man had been licensed to New Line Cinema. New Line didn't know what to do with it, so the rights reverted back to Marvel. First thing David did was worked on a loan. So in April 2005, Maisel, Marvel, and Merril Lynch agreed on a loan for $525 million to allow the production of any movie up to a budget of $165 million.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and check what the original budgets are. I don't know if you have those in your notes from the previous ones.
Keep talking and I'll look.
So in order to get this, the other thing they had to do was no movie could be more than PG-13 rated, which is fine. They never intended to. And I don't think many of the early 2000 movies never were more than PG-13. So that wasn't an issue.
So the production budget of Iron Man was $140 million.
Yeah, right within the wheelhouse.
But is that the only movie that they had to worry about keeping under?
No, it was the first handful of them. I think it may have changed. The agreement changed after Iron Man did so well. But I believe if you look up Incredible Hulk, at least
Incredible Hulk was 150.
Yeah. So right in that range there. So the only risk that Marvel had to put up, they didn't put up any cash. What they had to do was put up a handful of characters as collateral. So if these movies didn't do well, they lost the rights to the characters. And those characters were Ant-Man, the Avengers, Black Panther, Captain America, Cloak and Dagger, Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, Nick Fury, the Power Pack, and Shang-Chi.
The Power Pack?
We'll get into it when we get to the Big Hero 6 bonus episode.
All right. And what's Cloak and Dagger? Not the Dabney Coleman movie from the 80s?
No, the show that's on Freeform. Or was on Freeform.
Yeah. That's yeah. Is that supposed to be a YA?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's
good. The show is just like The Runaways.
Do you like
I haven't watched it.
Oh, okay.
I watched The Runaways. The Runaways was great. We'll do a bonus episode on that one.
Oh, we will? That means I got to watch it, Pat.
Oh. It's really good. It's only like 2 seasons.
Is that okay? If it's only that long.
3 seasons.
Oh, now you're adding a season?
They're only like 13 episodes a season.
That's a lot. That's a commitment, Pat. All right.
Do it for the brand. Anyway, back to Marvel and Merril Lynch. So Marvel put up all these characters as collateral, but Merril Lynch started to get cold feet and demanded that Marvel put up a third of the production budget on each of the films.
With the money that they loaned them? Or their own money?
Their own money.
Okay. You loaned them money because they didn't have any Merril Lynch.
Right. And so that's when Merril Lynch was starting to backtrack and be like, well, wait a minute. The Raimi movies were kind of tapering off. X-Men movies were kind of tapering off. And then Marvel was about to launch a new wave of superhero movies.
Well, that makes sense too, because they take the loan out in 2005, you said.
Yep.
And they don't even release Iron Man doesn't come out until 2008.
Right, and Incredible Hulk doesn't come out to 2008. So you had 2 movies going at the same time.
Right.
You just got handed a boatload of cash. So what they did when Merril Lynch said we're going to pull back was, they pulled back some of the foreign rights from Paramount, who was the distributor. And that's why you'll notice the Paramount logo on the first 7 movies. Was it 6?
Yeah, we kept...
we tried to keep track, but we never remembered.
But we're not that good.
So what they did was they pre-sold them to distributors in those regions. And so they were able to use that money and then fund the third of the movies. I think in the Iron Man episode, I had said this and I had found an article, but I cannot find it again. I cannot confirm. Iron Man wasn't included in that initial 10 characters of collateral that were put up. And the article had stated that Merril Lynch refused to pay for it because they wouldn't have gotten anything from that character. But I cannot find any confirmation from that again. So it's up in the air whether Merril Lynch, the money went to fund the production of Iron Man. I believe at this time it probably did.
I would think that some of it did.
Yeah, because they didn't have any other funding, basically. So Marvel did it. You know, they went off and they filmed. And the interesting thing is, 4 months after Iron Man came out and Incredible Hulk came out, the stock market crashed.
Mm-hmm.
So Merrill Lynch, all the big banks were in trouble. This was probably one of their better bets that they had made, but it could have derailed had the first 2 movies not done well, which we know that Iron Man did.
It's 2020 vision looking back, but I don't see how you could think it wouldn't do well if you just made it if it wasn't as, even if it was like 65% as good as it was.
Yeah.
I don't see how that would fail.
You're taking a shot with Robert Downey Jr.
You are, but like
you're taking a shot with a movie that didn't have a completed script.
Well, they all don't, right? Yeah. Nah, I understand. I get you. It's 2020 vision. I understand. Yep.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with what you're coming from, but I could see where the hesitancy was at the time.
Yeah.
You're taking an actor who kind of was washed up or perceived as washed up. He had gotten out of prison. And then you're taking a script on a character that nobody cared about at the time.
Yeah.
Like Iron Man had gotten a animated series, but he wasn't as big as X-Men. He wasn't as big as Spider-Man. He probably has never been as big as they are, but he's, you know, because of the movies, he's been bumped up into that upper echelon of characters.
Yeah.
So then, you know, obviously Marvel did it. You know, Marvel Studios was a success.
You're like, Marvel did it.
That's the end of this episode. No, but the last person
gosh
to know
darn it,
is,
they did it.
Shucks. The last person to know is obviously Kevin Feige, who we've discussed ad nauseum in our other episodes. He is now he's the president of Marvel Studios now, correct?
Isn't he I have here, well, in 2007 he was promoted from junior executive to president, which is quite the jump. But isn't he now, he's a big part of Disney now too?
Yes, he is a big part of Disney.
He oversees Star Wars?
He's going to oversee something, yes. Yeah. I think Star Wars. But he started his career working for Laura Schuler, wife of Richard Donner. Mm-hmm. She had produced everything from Superman to X-Men. So she was in on the superhero boom. She knew how to produce them, knew how to tell their stories.
Yeah, they were his mentor.
Yes.
Mentors.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so she, because she was producing X-Men, brought him on as an associate producer because he was a nerd. He knew the characters and he knew the knowledge of the Marvel comic universe.
You nerd.
So he was helping.
You called him that.
I did. I think he called himself that. So he was able to help with the characters, and then, as you said, 7 years later, he became president of Marvel Studios, which is like, if we could only get that type of,
that's a big jump.
That's a big jump.
So 2009, Disney buys them. Now I told you that that's 11 years ago, but I told you that Marvel Studios is worth $17 billion.
Yep.
How much did Disney buy them for? Do you remember? $4 billion. Yep. Quite the investment.
That was. And they don't even have all the characters out yet because they just finally got the Fox characters. So now they have Fantastic Four and the X-Men that can come in.
They have all the X-Men?
This is where things get tricky.
Right.
Because certain characters either were licensed or licensed out in perpetuity. So the Hulk, I believe, cannot have another movie with his name in it.
For how long?
Until they buy the rights back from Universal. And Universal isn't going to sell.
But those rights don't have a
I don't know if they have a term date. No, I don't know. I'd have to look more into that.
So why doesn't Universal just make the movie?
Because you'll run into the same problem that Sony's run into. Is how do you make these movies with characters that you know?
2 words. Alternate universe. They're doing it with DC. Why not just be like, okay, that's fine. Go take one of the popular runs. I know we're off the rails here. Go take a popular run from the Hulk series and be like, this is an alternate universe. We're doing our own Hulk movie. They did it with James Bond when what was the name? On Her Majesty's Secret Service was not even, it's a different company.
Right.
So just do that. Oh no, I take it back.
It was
I take
Casino
it back.
Royale, wasn't it?
No. Yeah. No, well, Casino Royale was Woody Allen.
Oh, right.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service was the Lazenby movie, and then after that, Connery came back to do one of the Bonds, but it was not the
Broccoli Productions,
right?
Which you did the Broccoli family,
right? Just do that.
I don't know what to tell you.
Your nose in Disney and Marvel Studios' face and do your own movie.
Well, that's what Sony's doing.
There you go.
So yes, so Sony owns.
What's this episode about again?
This is Marvel Studios. Universal owns Hulk. This is why you can't get a new Hulk movie in the title, but he could be with the other characters. there's the agreement between Sony and Spider-Man and Marvel about, how to use the Spider-Man character in the Spider-Man universe, where Sony is going to play in it with Morbius and Spider-Woman and Venom.
So those are going to be part of the Marvel studio? No. Will there be a different Spider-Man with those?
No, I don't believe so.
So Tom Holland's going to be in a movie with Tom Hardy as Venom?
Possibly.
Okay. Whatever. I don't care. Whatever.
Who cares?
It's all messed up anyways. Yeah. Everything's always all over the place, and that's fine.
But this is where we are with Marvel Studios. They are now entering into TV shows and Disney Plus, and we're waiting patiently, sort of, possibly, for the movies to come out in theaters.
Oh, they'll come out.
If we could ever go back to theaters.
Well, they'll come out. They're just not going to do money.
Right.
They're not going to do the money they hope they'll do. So, but yeah, they'll come out, and then they'll just do all right. All right. So
that's it. Thanks for listening.
Well, you don't have recommended.
Well, I had the Hollywood Reporter.
I sure already blew that recommended reading.
Yeah, I already blew the recommended reading.
So
sorry about that.
That's the history of Marvel Studios in a condensed nutshell. As Pat said, they did it. So join us next week. We are going to be returning to our regularly scheduled phase 2 broadcast, where we talk about Iron Man 3. And then we'll start talking about the phase 2 movies. So this is the last of the bonus episodes. And until, I guess, in between phase 2 and 3.
Yes.
We hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, or you want to tell us that tell Pat wrong, or tell me that I'm wrong, feel free to jump on the comments. Feel free to contact us. We are on Instagram. We are on Twitter. And we are also at ForgottenEntertainment.com. Just look for Yet Another MCU Podcast. That's us.
Absolutely. Remember to rate, review, subscribe, and all that fun stuff.
Tell your friends. Tell Kevin Feige that Pat called him a nerd. And that's it. We'll see you next week for Iron Man 3.
Thanks, guys.